They say I have it all: the reputation, the money, a life worth envying. But no one sees the cracks hidden deep inside, a missing piece always absent, an invisible call from the past. I stand in my loft apartment in Lincoln Park, Chicago, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows like distant stars that will never reach me. My name is Chloe Maxwell. I am 34 years old, and I am a successful art auctioneer. On paper, my life looks perfect. In reality, every breath I take feels borrowed from someone else's story. The silver bracelet on my wrist catches the lamplight, its tiny train engine charm glinting as I turn my hand. Sterling Thorne, the man I call father, once told me this was a family heirloom, a treasure passed down through generations of Thorns. Like everything else he ever told me, it was a lie. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the night everything shattered. The evening of Sterling Thorne's 70th birthday party arrived with all the pomp and circumstance befitting a real estate mogul worth $230 million. The historic Gold Coast mansion blazed with light, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow prisms across marble floors. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with champagne and canapes. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. The who's who of Chicago society had descended in their finest gowns and tailored suits, air-kissing and networking with practiced ease. I wore a midnight blue dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, my hair swept up in an elegant chignon, diamond studs in my ears. I looked the part of Sterling Thorne's daughter. I had spent 34 years trying to look the part. Celeste Thorne, resplendent in a burgundy evening gown that probably cost as much as a small car, held court near the grand piano. Her laugh, high and tinkling, carried across the room. She had always been beautiful, my mother, cold and beautiful, like a sculpture carved from ice. When she looked at me, which was rarely, her eyes held the same warmth one might reserve for a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. I had learned early not to expect affection from Celeste, or approval, or even basic kindness. What I got instead were criticisms delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep without leaving visible scars. My clothes were never quite right. My career choice was disappointing. My refusal to marry one of the eligible bachelors from their social circle was a personal affront. But I had endured. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, or at least their respect. I worked myself to exhaustion, building my career as an art auctioneer, hoping that success might finally make them proud. I attended their tedious social functions, smiled until my face ached, played the role of the dutiful daughter even as they criticized every choice I made. Sterling took the stage as midnight approached, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his custom suit impeccable. He raised his champagne flute, and the room fell silent. He spoke of his achievements, his business empire, his legacy. He thanked his wife, his business partners, his friends. He did not mention me. This was not unusual. I had grown accustomed to being invisible in my own family, but something in me shifted that night. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was exhaustion from years of trying and failing to be enough. Maybe it was the way Celeste's gaze slid right past me, as if I did not exist. When Sterling finished his speech, I made the mistake of approaching him. The crowd had thinned slightly, people moving toward the dessert buffet. I touched his arm gently, and he turned to me, with that look I knew so well, the one that made me feel about 3 inches tall. "Happy birthday, Father," I said softly. "I wanted to give you something." I had brought a gift, carefully chosen and wrapped, a rare first edition book on Chicago architecture that I had tracked down through my auction house connections. I knew he collected such things. I thought, naively, that he might appreciate the effort. He did not even look at the package in my hands. Instead, his face darkened, his jaw clenched. Around us, conversation continued, but I felt the shift in the air, the way people's attention began to drift our way. "You are the shame of the Thorne name," he said, his voice low but carrying. Heads turned. The string quartet seemed to falter. "A measly auctioneer instead of running my empire? I will strike your name from my $230 million will." The words hit me like physical blows, but I remained standing, the gift still in my outstretched hands. I had heard such things before, variations on the theme of my inadequacy. I had learned to absorb them, to let them settle into the collection of wounds I carried inside. But then his hand came up, fast and hard, and the crack of his palm against my cheek echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. The sound was dry, sharp, final. Everything stopped. The music, the conversation, the clink of glasses. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. I felt the sting spread across my face like wildfire, tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. The gift fell from my hands and hit the marble floor with a dull thud. No one moved. No one spoke. They all just stared. These pillars of Chicago society, their faces a mixture of shock and barely concealed fascination. They would dine out on this story for months. Poor Chloe Maxwell, slapped by her own father at his birthday party. How scandalous! How delicious! Celeste stood frozen by the piano, one hand pressed to her pearl necklace, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. But she did not come to me. She never came to me. I raised my hand slowly to my mouth, felt the warmth of blood on my fingers. Something inside me that had been bending for 34 years finally snapped. Not with a dramatic crack, but with a quiet, definitive break, like the last thread holding together a frayed rope. I looked at Sterling Thorne, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. Not as my father, not as the man whose approval I had spent decades chasing, but as what he truly was: a bully, a tyrant, a man who wielded his money and power like weapons against anyone who dared to exist outside his control. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand, straightened my shoulders, and did something I had never done before. I looked him directly in the eye, and I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I did not shrink. Instead, I picked up my clutch purse from where I had set it on a nearby table, walked over to Celeste with measured steps, and threw it at her feet. It landed with a satisfying thump, and she jumped back as if I had thrown a snake. "Keep your money," I said, my voice steady, despite the trembling in my hands. "Keep your name. Keep your empire. I am done." Then I turned and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the marble with each step, the only sound in that vast, silent ballroom. No one tried to stop me. No one said a word. They simply watched as I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the December night. The cold hit me like a wall, stealing my breath. Snow had begun to fall, fat flakes drifting down from the purple-black sky, settling on my bare shoulders and melting instantly. My cheek throbbed, and I could feel it swelling already. The taste of blood lingered on my tongue. I stood on the mansion's front steps, looking up at the sky, and felt hot tears streak down my face, mixing with the melting snow and probably ruining my makeup completely. I did not care. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I did not care what I looked like, what anyone thought, whether I was disappointing someone. Is this freedom? I whispered to the falling snow. Or is this the beginning of a new nightmare? I did not know the answer. I only knew that I could not go back through those doors, back into that life, back into the cage I had been living in without even realizing it had bars. I called an Uber with shaking fingers and rode home in silence, the driver wisely not attempting conversation with a woman in an evening gown, with a rapidly swelling face and mascara-stained cheeks. When I reached my apartment, I collapsed on my couch, still in my dress, and stared at the ceiling until the sun began to rise. The morning after brought a different kind of pain. I woke on my couch, my neck stiff, my dress wrinkled, my face a swollen mess of purple and blue. My phone had been buzzing all night. I finally picked it up to find hundreds of notifications. Text messages from acquaintances asking if I was okay. Emails from colleagues expressing concern. News alerts that made my stomach turn. "Billionaire slaps daughter, strikes her from Will Chicago society scandal," read one headline. There was a photo, grainy but clear enough, of Sterling's hand connecting with my face. Someone had been recording. Of course someone had been recording. Everything was content now, even other people's trauma. I turned off my phone and walked to my bathroom mirror, forcing myself to look. The bruise was spectacular, spreading from my cheekbone down to my jaw in shades of purple and yellow. My lip was split and swollen. I looked like I had been in a fight. I supposed I had been, in a way. A fight that had lasted 34 years and ended in a single, brutal moment. I was making coffee, my hands still shaking slightly, when my doorbell rang. I considered not answering. I was not ready to face the world, not ready for the pitying looks or the invasive questions. But the bell rang again, insistent, and something told me this was not a curious neighbor or a reporter looking for a quote. I opened the door to find 3 people in dark suits. The woman in front was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. She held out a business card. "Miss Maxwell, my name is Judith Blackwell. I am an attorney. May we come in?" I looked at the card, then at her, then at the 2 men standing behind her, both carrying briefcases. None of them looked like they were from Sterling's legal team. I had met those sharks before, slick and smiling and utterly ruthless. "Attorneys for what?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. "We represent your biological father," Judith said gently. "It is urgent that we speak with you." I laughed, a harsh sound that hurt my split lip. "My biological father? Lady, you have the wrong person. Sterling Thorne is my father." Unfortunately. Judith's expression remained steady, patient. "Miss Maxwell, please. What we have to tell you will change your life, but we need to come inside. This is not a conversation for a hallway." Something in her tone, in her eyes, made me step back and let them in. They filed into my apartment, and I gestured vaguely at the couch and chairs. They, Saturday. I remained standing, arms crossed defensively over my chest. Judith opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency and withdrew a manila folder. She placed it on my coffee table, then looked up at me. What I am about to tell you will be difficult to hear, she began. But every word of it is true, and I have documentation to prove it. Miss Maxwell. You were not born Chloe Maxwell. You were born Lila Vance. The room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. That is ridiculous. I have a birth certificate. I have baby photos. I have forged documents, Judith interrupted gently. All of them. Miss Maxwell, please, sit down. I did, more because my legs would not hold me than because I wanted to. Judith slid the folder toward me and opened it. Inside were photocopies of official-looking documents, police reports, newspaper clippings. My eyes caught on a headline. 6-month-old vanishes from Portland Park, parents devastated. The date was June 1990. I had been born in January 1990, according to my birth certificate. Or at least, that was what I had always believed. In June of 1990, Judith continued, her voice soft but clear. A 6-month-old baby girl named Lila Vance was taken from Laurelhurst Park in Portland, Oregon. Her parents, Daniel and Evelyn Vance, were devastated. The case was investigated extensively, but no trace of the child was ever found, until now. She pulled out a photograph, old and slightly faded, and placed it in front of me. A young couple sat on a park bench, radiant with happiness, holding a baby girl between them. The woman had dark hair and a smile that crinkled her eyes. The man was handsome, with kind eyes and his arm wrapped protectively around his small family, but it was the baby that made my breath catch. She wore a small silver bracelet on her tiny wrist, and even in the faded photograph, I could see the charm clearly. A tiny train engine. My hand went automatically to my own wrist, to the bracelet I had worn for as long as I could remember. The bracelet Sterling had called a family heirloom. No, I whispered. This is insane. You are insane. Judith pulled out another document. 3 months ago, your DNA was entered into a national database as part of a routine background check for your auction house work. It matched a sample that has been in the system for 35 years, a sample taken from Lila Vance's baby clothes. Miss Maxwell, there is no doubt. You are Lila Vance. The room was spinning now. I could not breathe, could not think. Everything I knew, everything I believed about myself, was crumbling like a sandcastle in a tsunami. The woman you know as Celeste Thorne was born Vivian Ash, Judith continued relentlessly. She had a history of mental health issues and was deemed unable to conceive. She became obsessed with having a child. She and Sterling Thorne, who was then a mid-level real estate developer desperate to climb the social ladder, met at a psychiatric treatment facility where they were both being treated. They hatched a plan. She pulled out more documents, spreading them across the coffee table like accusatory fingers pointing at the truth. They traveled to Portland, selected their target carefully, a young working-class couple unlikely to have the resources for an extensive private search. On June 15, 1990, while your mother Evelyn took you to the park, Vivian Ash, who was going by various aliases, distracted her by pretending her own child was in distress. In the confusion, Sterling grabbed you and they fled. They crossed into Mexico, used a corrupt adoption agency to forge paperwork, and returned to Chicago as the proud parents of Chloe Thorne. I could not speak, could not move. My entire body had gone numb. Your biological mother, Evelyn Vance, passed away 5 years ago, Judith said, and her voice finally cracked with emotion. She died of heart failure, brought on by decades of grief and stress from never knowing what happened to her baby. But your father, Daniel Vance, never stopped looking for you. He hired private investigators, kept the case active, donated money to missing children's organizations. When the DNA match came through 3 weeks ago, he contacted us immediately. She reached into her briefcase one more time and pulled out a small velvet box. She opened it to reveal a silver bracelet, identical to mine, worn smooth from years of handling. Your father has worn this every day for 35 years, Judith said softly. He and your mother bought them as a set. They had planned to give them to you when you turned 16. He wants you to know that he never gave up hope. And he is here, Miss Maxwell. He is downstairs right now, waiting to meet you, if you will see him. I looked at the bracelet in the box, then at the one on my wrist. 2 halves of a broken promise, separated by decades of lies and stolen time. My vision blurred with tears. My whole life, I whispered. Everything I thought I knew. It was all a lie? Judith nodded. I am afraid so. The Thornes will be arrested within the next 48 hours. We wanted to tell you first, to give you time to process before the media storm hits. But Miss Maxwell, there is a man downstairs who has spent 35 years hoping for this moment. He has lost so much already. If you are willing, he would very much like to meet his daughter. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, trying to reconcile the impossible. The family I had spent my entire life trying to please, trying to love, trying to be good enough for, they had stolen me, taken me from parents who actually wanted me, loved me, searched for me. All those years of feeling like something was wrong, like I did not fit, like I was missing something essential, suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. Finally, I stood on shaking legs. He is really downstairs? He is, Judith confirmed. Would you like to meet him? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Judith and her colleagues stood, gathering their papers but leaving the folder for me. Take all the time you need, she said. We will wait outside. After they left, I walked to my bathroom and stared at my reflection again. The bruise on my face seemed almost fitting now, a physical manifestation of the violence that had been done to my life, my identity, my truth. I washed my face gently, changed out of my wrinkled evening dress into jeans and a sweater, and with trembling hands, I walked to the elevator. The ride down felt eternal. My heart hammered against my ribs. What do you say to a father you never knew you had? How do you make up for 35 years of lost time? How do you mourn a mother you never got to know? The elevator doors opened, and I saw him immediately. He stood by the lobby windows, his back to me, hands shoved in the pockets of his coat. His hair was silver, his shoulders broad but slightly stooped, as if weighted down by years of grief. I took a step forward, and he must have heard my footsteps because he turned. Our eyes met, and time stopped. He was perhaps in his early 60s, with lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes, they were warm and brown and filled with so much hope and pain that I felt it in my chest like a physical thing. He took a step toward me, then stopped, as if afraid I might bolt. Lila? He whispered, and his voice broke on my name. My real name. A name I had never heard before today, but that somehow felt more real than any I had carried. I could not speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face, and that was all the permission he needed. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around me, and I let him. This stranger, who was not a stranger, held me while I sobbed into his coat, and he smelled like coffee and cedar, and something indefinably safe. You are home, he kept saying, over and over, his voice thick with tears. You are finally home. We stood like that for a long time, 2 people trying to bridge a chasm of stolen years with a simple embrace. When I finally pulled back, he cupped my face gently in his hands, careful of my bruise, and just looked at me. You look so much like her, he said softly. Your mother. You have her smile, her eyes. God, Lila, I have missed you so much. I do not know what to call you, I admitted, my voice small. Daniel, he said. Call me Daniel for now. We have time to figure out the rest. He noticed me looking at his wrist, where the silver bracelet hung. He unclasped it with fumbling fingers and held it up next to mine. Identical, down to the tiny engraved train engines. Your mother picked these out. She said you always got excited when you heard trains. These were supposed to keep us connected, no matter where we were. I never stopped believing we would find you. I broke down again, and he held me, this father I had never known, and I felt something inside me begin to crack open, something that had been locked away for so long I had forgotten it existed. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of healing. Tell me about her, I said when I could speak again. Tell me about my mother. We went to a quiet coffee shop down the street, tucked into a corner booth, and Daniel pulled out his phone. He had hundreds of photos saved, years of memories I had missed. He told me about Evelyn Vance, about how they had met in college, how she had been an elementary school teacher with a laugh that could light up a room, how she had decorated a nursery in soft yellows and greens, how she had sung to me every night, how she had kept my room exactly as it was for 35 years, unable to let go of hope. She never stopped believing we would find you, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Even at the end, even when her heart was giving out, she made me promise I would keep looking. She wrote you letters, Lila, hundreds of them, one for every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone she imagined you were having. They are all waiting for you, if you want them. She is really gone? I asked, the grief for a mother I never knew hitting me with unexpected force. Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes. 5 years ago. The doctor said it was heart failure, but I know better. It was a broken heart. Losing you broke something in her that never healed. But she loved you, Lila. Every single day of her life, she loved you. I cried for this woman I would never meet, for the childhood I never had, for the 35 years that had been stolen from all of us. Daniel reached across the table and held my hand, and we grieved together, 2 strangers bound by blood and loss. Over the next few days, Daniel told me everything. About the investigation that had gone cold, about the empty leads and false hopes, about the private investigators he had hired, the fortune he had spent trying to find me. About how he had built his engineering career into a renewable energy empire worth over $2 billion, partially as a distraction from the grief, but also with the hope that, if I was out there somewhere, maybe I would see his name, recognize something, find him. He told me about Evelyn's decline, how the not knowing had eaten away at her slowly but surely. How they had divorced 10 years after my disappearance, not because they did not love each other, but because staying together meant drowning in shared grief. how they had remained close friends until the end, united in their search for me. She never remarried? Daniel said. Neither did I. How could we, when the most important person in our lives was missing? The guilt threatened to swallow me whole. I am so sorry, I kept saying. I am so sorry. No, Daniel said firmly, gripping my hands. No, Lila, none of this is your fault. You were a baby. You were stolen from us. The only people responsible are the ones who took you, and they will pay for what they did. 2 weeks after that first meeting, I stood with Daniel in his car, parked across from the Ravenswood Country Club. Through the windows, I could see Sterling Thorne on the golf course, laughing with his business partners. Celeste Thorne sat at a table on the terrace, sipping mimosas with her society friends. Not a care in the world. They had no idea what was coming. They had lived 35 years in stolen happiness, building their empire on a foundation of lies and theft. They had taken a child from her parents, forged a life out of someone else's tragedy, and never once looked back. Are you ready? Daniel asked quietly. I looked down at my wrists, where both silver bracelets now hung. 2 pieces of a promise finally reunited. Yes, I said. I am ready. The FBI vehicles came from 3 directions at once, black SUVs with lights flashing, agents in windbreakers pouring out like a dark tide. The sirens shattered the country club's genteel peace. Golfers froze mid-swing. Tennis players stopped their matches. The terrace erupted in shocked gasps and frantic whispers. I watched through the car window as agents approached Sterling on the green. He looked confused at first, then annoyed, then shocked as they announced why they were there. His face went from ruddy to pale in seconds. He tried to argue, to throw his weight around, but this was not a business deal he could negotiate his way out of. These were federal agents, and they had all the evidence they needed. Celeste's arrest was more dramatic. She screamed when the agents approached her table, knocked over her mimosa, clutched at her pearls like they might save her. Her friends backed away, distancing themselves from the scandal with impressive speed. She cried that they had only wanted a child, that they had given me a good life, that they had loved me. She was still lying, even at the end. Sterling looked around wildly, and his gaze found our car, found me sitting there watching his world collapse. For just a moment, our eyes met through the glass and distance. The arrogance was gone, the cruelty was gone. What remained looked almost like remorse. His lips moved, and even though I could not hear him, I knew what he said. I am sorry. But sorry was not enough. Sorry could not give me back my mother, my childhood, my real name and identity. Sorry could not heal 35 years of damage. I turned away, facing forward, and Daniel started the car. We drove away as the agents led Sterling and Celeste to separate vehicles in handcuffs, and I did not look back. That chapter of my life was over. The media storm that followed was overwhelming. Billionaire couple arrested for decades-old kidnapping, screamed the headlines. My face was everywhere, both as Chloe Maxwell and as the age-progressed image of baby Lila Vance. Reporters camped outside my apartment. My phone never stopped ringing. The world wanted my story, wanted my pain, wanted to turn my trauma into entertainment. Daniel hired security, helped me navigate the legal proceedings, stood between me and the worst of it. The Thornes pled guilty in exchange for lighter sentences, 20 years each. Their lawyers argued that they had provided me with a good life, with opportunities I might not have otherwise had. The prosecutor countered that they had robbed me of my identity, my family, and my mother's last years of life. The judge sided with the prosecution. I attended the sentencing. I sat in the courtroom and listened as Sterling and Celeste made their statements, still trying to justify what they had done. Celeste cried about how desperately she had wanted to be a mother. Sterling spoke about giving me the best education, the finest things. Neither of them seemed to grasp that they had stolen a person, not acquired an object. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood on shaking legs and approached the microphone. I looked at Sterling and Celeste, these people who had shaped my entire existence, and I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, no love. Just a profound emptiness where they used to live in my heart. You took 35 years from me, I said, my voice steady. You took my mother, who died never knowing I was alive and loved and safe. You took my father's chance to raise his daughter. You took my name, my identity, my truth. And for what? Because you wanted a child? Thousands of children need loving homes. You could have adopted legally. You could have fostered. But you did not want a child. You wanted a possession, something to complete your perfect life picture. And when I did not perform the way you wanted, when I did not choose the life you demanded, you discarded me. So, no, I do not forgive you. I do not wish you well. I simply want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life building what you tried to destroy. I will live as Lila Vance, and I will make sure the world knows what you did. That is my statement. I sat back down, and Daniel squeezed my hand. The judge sentenced them both to 20 years in federal prison, and I walked out of that courtroom as Lila Eleanor Vance, named for the mother I never got to know. The months that followed were a strange blend of grief and discovery. I sold my Chicago apartment, unable to remain in a city that held so many false memories. I declined Daniel's offer of financial support. He had already lost so much, I did not want to take anything more from him, even his money. More importantly, I needed to build this new life myself, to prove that I could stand on my own feet without the Thorne name or the Thorne money or anyone else's expectations. I moved to Portland, to the city where I had been born, where my real life had started before it was stolen. I used my savings and took out a loan to open a small art restoration studio in a converted warehouse near the waterfront. I called it Eleanor's Hands, in honor of my mother, and I threw myself into the work. There was something profoundly healing about restoration work, taking broken, damaged things and bringing them back to life, piece by careful piece. Every sculpture I mended, every painting I cleaned, every frame I rebuilt felt like I was fixing a small part of myself. The studio was my sanctuary, a place where I could be quiet with my thoughts, where I could process everything that had happened, where I could slowly, painfully, begin to figure out who Lila Vance actually was. Daniel visited often. He never pushed, never demanded more than I could give. He simply showed up, brought coffee, sat in the studio and watched me work, told me stories about my mother. Gradually, carefully, we built a relationship. It was not the father-daughter bond that had been stolen from us, that was gone forever, but it was something new and precious and real. He brought me boxes of Evelyn's things. Her journals, filled with thoughts and dreams and desperate prayers for my safe return. The letters she had written, one for every birthday I missed. I read them late at night in my small apartment above the studio, crying as I learned about the woman who had loved me from a distance for 35 years. She wrote about her hopes for me, the kind of person she imagined I would become. She told me about family traditions I would never experience, about the grandmother I never met who had taught her to bake. She shared her fears and her faith and her unending, irrational hope that someday, somehow, I would come home. You would have loved the ocean, she wrote in one letter. We took you to Cannon Beach when you were 4 months old, and you laughed at the waves. I promised myself we would go every summer, watch you grow up with sand between your toes and salt in your hair. I am keeping that promise in my heart, even though I cannot keep it in reality. Wherever you are, my darling girl, I hope there is laughter. I hope there is joy. I hope someone is loving you the way you deserve to be loved. I sobbed reading that, knowing that no one had loved me that way for most of my life. But I was learning to love myself that way now. That had to be enough. Daniel's most meaningful gift came 6 months after my move to Portland. He appeared at the studio one afternoon with a moving truck. I have something for you, he said, and directed the movers to bring in a large object covered in blankets. When they unwrapped it, I gasped. It was the mahogany desk, the one I had painstakingly restored for Sterling Thorne, the one he had been so dismissive of. How did you? I bought it at the auction of his assets, Daniel explained. I recognized it from the photos of his estate. You did this work, did you not? I could tell from the craftsmanship. It belongs with you, Lila. It is a testament to your skill, to what you can create even in the most toxic environment. And maybe it can serve a new purpose now, a better purpose. I ran my hands over the wood, over the repairs I had made with such care, trying so desperately to earn a moment of approval from a man who would never give it. But now, in my own studio, surrounded by my own work, it meant something different. It was proof that beauty could emerge from pain, that broken things could be made whole again. I placed it in the center of my workspace, and it became my primary restoration table. Every day, I worked on that desk, and every day it reminded me of how far I had come. The studio slowly gained a reputation. I was meticulous, patient, willing to spend months on a single piece if that was what it took to do it right. Galleries and collectors began to seek me out. I was building something real, something mine, something no one could take away. One evening, almost a year after moving to Portland, I was working late when Daniel appeared in the doorway. He held a small velvet box, the kind that holds jewelry. I have been carrying this around for weeks, he admitted, trying to find the right moment. But I do not think there is a right moment for something like this, so I am just going to give it to you now. I set down my tools and took the box. Inside was a silver chain with a tiny locket. I opened it to find 2 photos, one on each side. On the left was baby Lila, smiling at the camera with my whole face. On the right was Evelyn, holding me, her face radiant with love. Your mother wanted you to have this, Daniel said softly. She made it right after you were born. She wore it every day until the end. I have been keeping it for you. I clasped it around my neck with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of it settle against my heart. Thank you, I whispered, and he pulled me into a hug. She would be so proud of you, he said. Of the woman you have become, despite everything. Of the strength it took to walk away from that life, to build this new one. She always knew you were special, Lila. She knew it from the moment you were born. I wore the locket every day after that, along with both silver bracelets. They became my armor, my reminder of who I really was and where I had come from. On the hardest days, when the grief threatened to overwhelm me, When I questioned every choice I had made, I would touch them and remember that I was Lila Eleanor Vance, and I was loved. The first-year anniversary of my awakening, as I had come to think of it, arrived on a cold February morning. I woke early, before dawn, and walked down to the waterfront. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and gray and endless. I thought about Evelyn's letter, about her promise to take me to the beach every summer. I thought about all the summers we had missed, all the memories that would never exist. But I also thought about the future, about the life I was building, piece by careful piece. About the relationships I was forming with Daniel, with new friends I had made in Portland, with clients who appreciated my work. About the woman I was becoming when I was not trying to be someone else's idea of acceptable. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the sunrise over the water. I sent it to Daniel with a simple message. "We made it. 1 year of being Lila." His response came immediately. "Your mother always said you were the strongest person she knew, even when you were just a baby. She was right. I love you, kiddo." I stood there on the beach, tears streaming down my face, and felt something I had not felt in 35 years. I felt whole, not healed. Healing was still a work in progress, but whole. Complete. Like all the scattered pieces of myself were finally coming together into something coherent. The studio continued to grow. I hired an assistant, a young art student named Maya who reminded me of myself at that age, hungry to learn, desperate to prove herself. I taught her everything I knew, encouraged her, praised her work, gave her the mentorship I had never received. Watching her confidence bloom was almost as healing as my own restoration work. On what would have been Evelyn's 65th birthday, Daniel and I held a small ceremony at Laurelhurst Park, the place where I had been taken. We planted a cherry tree in her memory, with a small plaque that read, "For Evelyn Vance, who never stopped believing. Your daughter came home." We scattered some of her ashes there, returning her to the place where her world had shattered, but now with the knowledge that the story had not ended in tragedy. I had been found. I had survived. I was building a life she would have been proud of. "I wish she could see this," I said, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "She can," Daniel said with certainty. "I have to believe that. I have to believe she knows you are safe now, that you are happy, that you came home." I wanted to believe it too. I chose to believe it. 2 years after leaving Chicago, I received an unexpected letter. It came to the studio, forwarded through several addresses, and the return address made my stomach drop. It was from Sterling Thorne, writing from federal prison. I almost threw it away unread. I had spent 2 years building a life without him, without that poison. Why let him back in, even through paper and ink? But curiosity won out. I opened it with Daniel sitting beside me, ready to burn it if needed. The letter was short, written in Sterling's precise handwriting. "Chloe, or perhaps I should say Lila, I know I have no right to contact you. I know that nothing I say can undo what I have done, can give you back what I took. But I wanted you to know that I see it now, in this cell, with nothing but time to think. I see what I did. Not just the kidnapping, though that is unforgivable enough, but every day after. Every criticism, every dismissal, every moment I made you feel less than. You were not less than. You were extraordinary, and I was too much of a coward, too obsessed with control and legacy to see it. You built something beautiful with your life despite me, not because of me. I am writing not to ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve that, but to tell you that I am sorry, truly, deeply sorry. For all of it, and I am glad you got away. I am glad you found your real father. I am glad you became Lila Vance. Be happy, if you can. That is all I should have ever wanted for you, Sterling." I read it twice, then set it down. Daniel watched me carefully. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I feel nothing," I said, and realized it was true. Sterling's remorse, genuine or not, changed nothing. It did not erase the past. It did not heal my wounds. It was simply words on paper from a man who had finally been forced to face the consequences of his actions. "Do you want to respond?" Daniel asked. I shook my head. No. He had 35 years to be the person he should have been. He does not get more of my time or energy now. I am done carrying his weight. I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and went back to work on the 18th century frame I was restoring. That was my response. I chose to focus on creation rather than destruction, on building rather than dwelling in the past. Celeste never wrote. I heard through the grapevine of legal proceedings that she maintained her delusion that she had done nothing wrong, that she had been a wonderful mother, that I was ungrateful for not appreciating the life she had given me. I was not surprised. Some people never face their truth. I had learned to let that be their problem, not mine. 3 years after my awakening, the studio was thriving. I had expanded into the space next door, hired 2 more assistants, and was booked out for months in advance. Art journals featured my work, museums consulted me on their restoration projects. I had built something real and substantial, entirely on my own terms. Daniel and I had settled into a comfortable relationship. He was not the father who had raised me. Those years were gone. But he was family in the way that mattered. He showed up. He supported me without smothering me. He shared stories about Evelyn, keeping her memory alive. We had dinner every Sunday, and he never missed a birthday or holiday. It was not the relationship we should have had, but it was genuine and loving and enough. On the 3rd anniversary of leaving that birthday party, I hosted an opening at the studio. I had spent months working on a special project, a series of restored pieces that told a story. Broken things made whole, damaged things made beautiful. Objects that had been discarded, deemed worthless, brought back to life with patience and care. The centerpiece was a massive gilt mirror from the 1800s that had been shattered into hundreds of pieces. I had spent a year carefully gluing each fragment back together, filling the tiny gaps with gold leaf in the Japanese tradition of kintsugi, making the cracks part of the beauty rather than something to hide. "This is my favorite," Maya said, standing beside me as guests circulated. "The way the gold catches the light, the way you can see the history of its breaking right there in the surface. It is more beautiful now than it was when it was perfect." "That is the point," I said softly. "We do not have to hide our broken places. They are part of our story. They make us who we are." Daniel gave a short speech that night, talking about loss and recovery, about the resilience of the human spirit, about the daughter he lost and found again. He cried openly, unashamed, and so did I. So did many of the guests, moved by the rawness of the story, the miracle of reunion. Afterward, as we cleaned up, Daniel handed me one more velvet box. "I have been saving this," he said. "Your mother left instructions. This was supposed to be for your 16th birthday, but I think now is the right time." Inside was a delicate gold ring with a small emerald, Evelyn's birthstone. Engraved inside the band were the words, "You are loved beyond measure." "She designed it herself," Daniel explained. "She wanted you to have something that would remind you always that you were wanted, cherished, loved, even if she could not be there to tell you herself." I slipped it onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me all along. "I wish I had known her," I whispered. "You do know her," Daniel said gently. "Every time you show kindness to Maya, you are channeling her. She was a teacher, and you are teaching. Every time you take something broken and make it beautiful again, you are living her belief that nothing is beyond redemption. Every time you choose compassion over bitterness, you are honoring her memory. You may not remember her, Lila, but she lives in you. I see her every time I look at you." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat at my desk, the restored mahogany surface smooth under my hands, and I wrote my own letter to Evelyn. I told her about my life, about the studio, about Daniel, about the woman I had become. I told her about the pain of discovering the truth, but also about the freedom of finally knowing who I really was. I told her I was sorry we never got our summers at the beach, but that I went there now on her birthday every year, and I thought of her with every wave. "I am not who I thought I was," I wrote. "But I am learning to be who I was always meant to be. I am learning that being stolen does not mean being broken beyond repair. I am learning that love does not end with death or distance. I am learning that the family I build is just as real as the family I was born into. I wish I had known you, but I am getting to know you through the stories, through the letters, through the love you left behind. And I want you to know that I am okay, more than okay. I am healing, I am building, I am becoming. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I did not know you existed. Thank you for the love that crossed time and space to find me. I carry it with me every day. Your daughter, Lila." I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box where I kept all of Evelyn's letters to me. Someday, I thought, I might have a daughter of my own. And I would give her this box, and she would know the story of the grandmother who loved her mother from across an impossible divide. She would know that love is stronger than time, than distance, than even death. She would know that broken things can be made whole, that stolen things can be reclaimed, that lost things can be found. 4 years after my awakening, I stood in my studio early one morning, the first light of dawn filtering through the skylights. The space smelled of wood polish and linseed oil, comfortable and familiar. My hands were stained with gilding solution, my apron splattered with a dozen different restoration materials. Classical music played softly from the speakers. This was my sanctuary, the place I had built from nothing, the life I had claimed for myself. I looked down at my wrists, at the twin silver bracelets catching the morning light, their tiny train engines still gleaming after all these years. I touched the locket around my neck, feeling the slight weight of the photos inside. I spun the emerald ring on my finger. Evelyn's final gift, her promise that I was loved beyond measure. And I realized something profound. I was no longer angry. The rage that had fueled me in those early days, the burning need for revenge, for justice, for someone to pay for what had been stolen from me, it had transformed into something else, into purpose, into creation, into a deep, abiding commitment to live fully, authentically, without apology. Sterling and Celeste were in prison, serving their sentences. That was justice. But it was not my healing. My healing came from this, from building something beautiful with my own hands, from the relationships I had chosen, the family I had reclaimed, and the family I was creating, from the decision, made fresh every single day, to be Lila Vance in all her messy, complicated, still becoming glory. I was not the same person I had been 4 years ago. That woman, Chloe Maxwell, who had spent her whole life trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it, who had shrunk herself to fit into spaces never meant for her, who had swallowed her truth to keep the peace, she was gone. Not erased, but transformed. Integrated. She was part of my story, but she was no longer my entire story. I was Lila Eleanor Vance, daughter of Daniel and Evelyn, restorer of broken things, builder of new beginnings. I was a woman who had been stolen but not destroyed, lost but ultimately found, wounded but healing. I carried my scars, but I also carried my strength. I honored my pain, but I also celebrated my resilience. The studio door chimed, and Maya arrived for the day, bringing coffee and her infectious enthusiasm. "Morning, boss. Ready to tackle that Victorian vanity?" I smiled, pulling on my work gloves. "Ready. Let us see what beauty we can uncover today." As we worked, carefully stripping away decades of bad paint jobs and misguided repairs to reveal the original craftsmanship beneath, I thought about what a perfect metaphor this was for life. Sometimes you have to carefully remove all the layers that do not belong, all the stories that were imposed on you, all the identities that were never truly yours, to discover what was there all along. I was not the thorn heir. I was not the disappointing daughter. I was not the failure or the burden or the shame. I was Lila, named for the sound of laughter, Eleanor for strength. I was wanted. I was loved. I was enough, exactly as I was. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Dinner tonight? I am making Evelyn's famous lasagna. Found the recipe card she left." I smiled and replied, "I will be there. Should I bring dessert?" "You should bring yourself. That is all I need." That evening, I locked up the studio and drove to Daniel's house, a comfortable craftsman in the hills with a view of the city. The kitchen smelled like garlic and tomatoes and basil, and Daniel had set the table with Evelyn's good china, the set she had been saving for special occasions that never came. "I figured it was time to use it," he said when he saw me looking. "She would have wanted it to be used, not saved. Life is for living, not for waiting." We ate and talked and laughed, and afterward, we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Daniel handed me a glass of wine, and we sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from true understanding. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Daniel said eventually. "I think about the morning you were taken, how ordinary it was, how we had no idea our world was about to end. Evelyn made pancakes. You had applesauce for breakfast and it got all over your face. We laughed so hard. And then we went to the park, because it was a beautiful day, and you loved watching the ducks. Just a normal day. And then, it was not." He paused, swirling his wine. I used to torture myself with that memory. All the things I should have done differently. All the ways I should have been more careful. But now, I think about it and I feel grateful. Grateful that we had that morning. Grateful for the 6 months we had with you before you were taken. Grateful that against all odds, you came back to me. Grateful for this, right now, sitting here with my daughter watching the sunset. I reached over and took his hand. I am grateful too. For you. For not giving up. For finding me. For giving me the space to become who I am supposed to be. For loving me even though we missed so much time. "I loved you when you were Chloe Maxwell, before I even knew you were mine," Daniel said. "When I saw the news about that man striking you, my heart broke for a stranger's daughter. And then when I found out you were my stranger's daughter, everything made sense. I think on some level, my heart always knew you. Blood calls to blood." We sat there until the stars came out, two people who had found their way back to each other across an impossible distance. And I thought about Evelyn, about how she would have loved this moment, how she had probably imagined moments like this 1,000 times during the years I was missing. Later, driving home through the quiet streets of Portland, I passed Laurelhurst Park. On impulse, I pulled over and walked to the cherry tree we had planted for Evelyn. It had grown in the 3 years since we planted it, its branches reaching up toward the sky. The plaque gleamed in the streetlight. I sat down at the base of the tree and looked up through the branches at the stars beyond. "Hi, Mom," I said softly. It was the first time I had called her that, even in my thoughts. "I wish you were here. I wish I remembered you. But I feel you sometimes, in the way Daniel talks about you, in the letters you left, in the love that somehow survived everything. Thank you for that. Thank you for the bracelets, and the letters, and the locket, and the ring. Thank you for never stopping. Thank you for believing I was out there. I hope wherever you are you know I am okay now. I am more than okay. I am home." A breeze rustled through the cherry tree's leaves, and I chose to believe it was her answer. I sat there for a while longer, feeling connected to her across the veil of death, across the years of separation, connected by a love that had never dimmed. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter somehow, more settled, more whole. I touched the bracelet on my wrist, the locket at my throat, the ring on my finger, and I felt surrounded by love. By the mother who died searching for me, by the father who never gave up, by the new family I was building, by the life I was creating, by the woman I was becoming. I drove home to my little apartment above the studio, climbed the stairs, and stood at the window looking out over the city. Portland was not Chicago. It did not have the same skyline, the same energy, the same desperate striving for status and success. It was quieter, gentler, more real. It was home in a way Chicago never had been. I made myself tea and sat at my small table, opening my laptop. I had been working on something in the quiet evening hours, a memoir of sorts, though I was not sure I would ever share it. But writing it down helped, gave shape to the chaos of the last 4 years, made sense of the senseless. I wrote about the slap heard round the world, about the moment everything broke open. I wrote about Judith Blackwell and her impossible revelation. I wrote about meeting Daniel for the first time, about reading Evelyn's letters, about the arrests and the trial and the slow, painful process of building a new identity. I wrote about Eleanor's hands and the healing power of restoration work. I wrote about the journey from victim to survivor to thriver. And I wrote about the lessons I had learned. About how you cannot earn love from people who are not capable of giving it. About how some relationships are toxic, no matter how hard you try to make them work. About how walking away is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. About how your past does not define you unless you let it. About how healing is not linear, and some days you will still cry for what you lost. About how chosen family is just as real as blood family. About how breaking can sometimes be the first step toward becoming whole. I wrote late into the night, the words flowing like they had been waiting inside me all along. And when I finally closed the laptop and crawled into bed, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who has finally put down a burden she was never meant to carry. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my windows and the sound of ships' horns from the harbor. I stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of a good night's sleep, and got ready for another day at the studio. Another day of taking broken things and making them whole. Another day of being Lila Vance. As I walked downstairs to open the studio, I paused at the threshold and looked back at the life I had built, the restored pieces waiting for their owners. The tools of my trade, well used and carefully maintained. The photographs on the wall, of Daniel and me, of Evelyn holding baby Lila, of the cherry tree in bloom. The certificates and awards, proof of my skill and dedication. The appointments in my calendar, weeks and months of work ahead. This was mine, all of it. Built not with Thorn money or Thorn connections, but with my own hands, my own vision, my own stubborn refusal to let my stolen years define my future years. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar sense of wood and varnish and possibility. The morning light slanted through the skylights, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Everything was exactly as I had left it, exactly as it should be. And I thought about Sterling's letter one more time, his claim that he was glad I got away, glad I became Lila Vance. He was right about one thing. I should have always been Lila Vance. For 35 years, I was living someone else's story, someone else's dream, someone else's plan. But not anymore. Now I was writing my own story. And it was a story of resilience and reclamation, of love that transcends death, of justice delayed but not denied, of broken things made more beautiful in the mending. It was a story of a woman who was stolen but found herself, who was lost but found her way home, who was silenced but learned to speak her truth. I am Lila Eleanor Vance, daughter of Daniel and Evelyn. Restorer of broken things, survivor, thriver, found. And though my story began with lies and loss, it continues here, in truth, in forgiveness of myself if not of them. In the whisper of a riverside studio, where every piece I restore is like mending a small part of my own soul. Because sometimes the life you were meant to live is the life you must build with your own hands, piece by careful piece, bracelet by bracelet, truth by truth. And that is exactly what I am doing, building, healing, becoming, living not the life that was stolen from me, but the life I am claiming for myself, one beautiful, broken, perfectly imperfect day at a time. This is my story. And I am finally home.